Friday is here again, and I'm ready to proceed. I entered into and began to get deeply involved with Erikson's first life cycle stage, and I will play with handouts again and put it back up on the screen. Is it there?
Yeah, individual life cycle stages.
Yes, I made it work. Okay, let me expand this. And I'll go down to the bottom because we're starting at the foundation of life. There it is on the left. It is the first stage we enter when we get born, what Erikson labeled trust versus mistrust. And I think I commented last time that the human organism is very, very frail and dependent and will die if it doesn't get constant care during the early stages of life. And Erikson says that the enduring uh, hallmarks of being greeted properly into the world by whoever is the parent or parenting figures, being soothed properly at times that soothing is necessary, being nourished properly, being stimulated properly, being watched over properly, if that goes forward, by the end of the era, the child is thrusting forward into the next stage of development that's right above with what Erikson calls an enduring orientation of trust that the world is good. It's good to have been born. People are dependable and people are not frightening and hurtful. And there's a very important, cheerful and optimistic foundation that's laid down in the developing young person, if properly managed. If there are disruptive experiences, misattuned experiences, chaotic or traumatic, lots of traumatic experiences, the resulting personality moves towards the other pole, mistrust. And people move out of the stage feeling that the world is dangerous, that bad things could happen anytime, often with superstitious attempts to prevent badness from happening, and fears of all kinds are built in because of what got off the rails in the first stage. And the orienting principle about greeting life is one of mistrust, suspiciousness, and fear of what's going to happen next. Very, very gloomy outlook on being alive in the world. I think I managed to talk about the first 6 months, that for the first 6 months, the challenge, well, let's go to good enough parenting. I'll get this off the screen. Let me stop this, go back and pick something else up. Where is it? Oh, here it is. Okay, is good enough parenting on the screen?
Yes.
Ah, ha, 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 ha. Let's see. I need to make it bigger. I need to get rid of looking at you guys so I have more room on my own screen. I will assume that the screen is now full of good enough parenting unless I hear to the contrary from one or the other of you. You will notice I've divided stage one into two kinds of parenting. Parenting needs to shift after about 6 months of age. So in the beginning, I will simply read what's here. New parents should strive to recreate womb-like conditions. Steady and consistent monitoring is necessary to keep the infant as comfortable as possible. Protection from and mitigation, if necessary, from extremes of temperature, noise, hunger, or pain are critical. When infants are awake, they thrive from being held, being the object of parental comments, seeing parental smiles, and feeling the warmth of acceptance. I'm going to add skin contact to that too, being held up against somebody. All these things begin to sustain an enduring bond. Infants have a critical need for eye, face, and skin contact. There it is. It is not possible to spoil infants. Constant attention is wonderful. It won't spoil infants. Uh, at about 6 months, I think I mentioned the British School of Psychoanalysis. They claim it's at 8 months. At about 6 months, the child comes up out of what Freud called primary narcissism, where the child's stream of consciousness is the entirety of the universe. And the child begins to experience I am an I am a self, and there are others. The child is not the center of the universe and the only thing experiencing anything. And at this point, anxiety surges because the child begins to experience its dependency and its helplessness. So now the parents have to shift. Do I want to go there yet? No, I want to add something else. I'm going to take a detour. Uh, I want to mix in some comments about attachment theory. Uh, Children from birth need to feel what's called secure attachments. There needs to be a consistent one, two, maybe even a few more parenting figures who the child is sustained by and who show up over and over and over again. There was a famous piece of research done by one of the analysts named Renee Spitz. It was about the importance of early bonding. And he went to Mexico to do the research. In one neighborhood in Mexico City, where there were very, very wealthy people, the wealthy people had established an orphanage for neglected and abandoned Mexican newborn children. The orphanage was a fine building. It was aesthetically pretty, designed by a nice architect, had very comfortable surroundings. The kids had that he did research in was the Mexican prison system, because in Mexico, when you have small children and are convicted of crimes are allowed to bring their very small children into the prison with them and to keep them there, and provision is made for that. So you couldn't have imagined two more contrasting sites. One where the children were raised in the lap of luxury with fine things and good food and sanitary conditions, and the other place where the food was rotten, that was buzzing with flies, it was dirty in there all the time. And the results of the evaluations of the trajectory of the infants was startling to Spitz. He had suspected it, but he didn't realize it was as bad as it was. With regard to developmental milestones, the kids in the prison system hit their developmental milestones at significantly earlier ages. They learned to sit up earlier, they learned to get control of their heads earlier, they learned to start walking earlier, and they learned to start talking earlier than the kids in the orphanage. In addition, there was far, far fewer physical illness, even though one place was fairly antiseptic and the other place was filthy. Their immune systems seemed to be responding better in the prison system than it was in the other system. And there is a condition, what the hell is it called? Marasmus. There's a condition known to pediatrician called marasmus. uh, it's like sudden infant death syndrome. For some reason, the child seems to close down, stop eating, and dies. And the child cannot be hooked on life any longer. So the child just curls up into a fetal position and ceases to live. That didn't happen in the prison system at all, but it did happen occasionally in the orphanage. Spitz's take on all this was the sisters meant well. They were kind and decent, but there was no consistent anybody with anybody. Whoever happened to be free at the moment when a child started crying was picked up by somebody, and there were probably too few of them to do that very quickly ordinarily. So the children were dependent on care that was delayed for a much longer period of time, and care that was being dispensed by a variety of different kinds of people. Where in the prison system, the child had care right away because the mothers didn't have much else to do except to tend to their infants. And it was a single person who did it all over and over and over again. And Spitz says that this makes a great difference in our lives and how we move towards what Erikson calls trust versus mistrust. Uh, the other bit of related information that bears on this, I once read a sociological study done in Israel. It was about children who were raised on kibbutzim. The typical pattern in the kibbutz, and that movement seems to be dying in Israel right now, is very popular with the socialists who emigrated from Eastern Europe, but it's not as popular anymore now that a few decades past that immigration has come to an end. It's living communally. Some of the kibbutzim were farms and crops were raised. Some of them were factories and things were produced. But at any rate, the parents would get up in the morning and go to work in whatever was the work that was to be done there. And the children of whatever age were sent to a communal nursery to be in, or preschool, or a school. They left their parents, came to be attended to by other parents. Some of the parents' assignments were to watch over the children, and they were separated from their own parents from about 7 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock at night when the parents finally came home. They even ate their dinners collectively. And the sociologists had done research. What was the fate of children who were raised communally by many different people and with lots of other surrogate siblings around? And according to the sociologists writing the report, they grew up to be very resilient. They could adapt to changing circumstances very well, and they made good soldiers, and they made very loyal and devoted workers when they were hired into their careers. The one thing they seemed to have in common, which was slightly different from the rest of the population, was that they were interested in marrying at much lower rates. They were not oriented to welcome and to run to embrace a close one on one relationship with anybody. If anything, they had some fears about what it meant to be closely attached to a single person because they hadn't had sufficient experience dealing with it and living through it when they were small. So they got pushed in a different direction than maybe had been intended for them. And their rate of marrying and their rate of having children after the experience on the kibbutz was significantly depressed from the general Israeli population. Okay, I will return back to good enough parenting. Uh, with the shift that comes with 8-month anxiety, there are several things that need to start changing. The child is now becoming a person, and the child gets frightened. If you leave the room, the child is likely to have a panic attack if the child is not ready for you to go and you need to come back. Uh, Comfort protection must continue, but now as crawling begins, the dance of separation and reattachment and mastering the anxiety attached to the dance is undertaken. Attachment to critical others has taken place, and terror can accompany their disappearance. The child knows who his parents are. Before that, he or she has recognized a human face and smiled when the presence is a human face. Now the child can recognize particular human faces. And I remember in my own life, I may have spoken about this on another occasion. I was a grandparent to several infants as they developed, and I liked visiting them when they were very small because they always grinned and giggled with delight when I would take them out of their crib or from their mother's arms. But once 6 months anxiety had started, now they started to stiffen and arch their backs and resist wanting to be handed over to me. I wasn't with them enough so that I wasn't a stranger. And strangers are not greeted with great welcoming on the part of fairly young children. Uh, as a matter of fact, if I would pull at them, sometimes they would scream in terror and try and to their mother. They didn't want any part of me. The child has to be allowed to begin the exploration of the environment, moving away first by crawling and then by walking and running. Yet parenting figures must not move too far away as to not be able to protect them from terror. Uh, if you paid attention, those of you who've had children, if you paid attention to them, they like crawling after a while, and well, of course, when they walk, they like walking too, and they'll walk some distance from you. They'll go explore the environment, but they'll turn and look over their shoulder every once in a while. And if you seem very far away, they'll start shrieking in terror. They've gotten too far from you, and you need to go pick them up right away and to comfort them and reassure them and say, there, I'm here. I'm watching you. It's okay. You can go. I'll be here. If you need to come back, I'll be with you. Now, parents make two kinds of mistakes. They begin to differentiate themselves into two possible mistakes. There are very busy parents who have been quite good being very attentive to young parents, but secretly they've yearned to have more free time. They may have a career that they're pursuing, at least part time. They want to have more time to pursue their career. They like talking to their friends. They like running little errands. So as soon as the kid seems to be more self sufficient, they'll rush to get on the phone. They'll go to another room away from where the kid is crawling. They'll leave the kid unattended and at too great a distance, too long, too often. And that's very scary for the kid. There's another group of parents who do the opposite. Teenage girls who are having children are a good example of this. They typically are troubled kids if they have kids as teenagers. They secretly want somebody who's going to love them. They know nothing much about the selflessness that's required to be attentive to a child, but they do know it's like having a wonderful live teddy bear. The teddy bear is going to be with them and be with them for the rest of their lives. They don't have to worry about being loved anymore. They're going to have a built in source of love in the personhood of their baby who will grow but will always be attached to them. So they interfere. They tend to interfere with the little toddler's beginning efforts at differentiating. If the kid wants to crawl down off the sofa where the child is staying with the mother, they'll reach down, pick them up, put them back on their lap, even though the kid is squirming to get away. They keep interfering with the motion away from them. They keep trying to abort it. They keep trying to interfere with it. I have this here somewhere. Yet parenting figures must not move too far away. The two extremes, capturing the child and interfering with separation, or becoming neglectful and moving too far away from the child, must be avoided. Physical separations lasting longer. Oh, and if you want to start traveling, then physical separations during this era from stage 1B, 6 months to about 30 months. Physical separations lasting longer than 48 hours between caregiving adults and the child can become quite wounding and should be avoided. We had a dog who was like that. If we were gone for more than 2 days, the dog wouldn't recognize us, wouldn't run to us when we came home. We had to go pet the dog a lot and reestablish the connection and make up to the dog for having been gone. And human infants are not too far removed from this. So that is the shift that needs to begin to be made in good enough parenting. Now, I'm talking up until this point about a variety of things during stage 1 that are necessary to sustain the child. This is only good enough parenting I'm describing here. I am not describing hideous parenting, but hideous parenting does take place. Uh, I did my doctoral dissertation on one of the psychoanalytic defense mechanisms, denial and fantasy. Denial and fantasy is the defense mechanism that allows the child to enter a world of daydreaming and to tune out the real world. And it's usually done because of the mistrust that Erikson talks about. The mistrust is profound. The real world is overwhelmingly dangerous, and the people in it are they're not only going to fail you, they could hurt you, they could kill you, they could destroy you. So childhood psychosis is based upon the mechanism of denial and simply daydreaming a lot, just sitting in the classroom and not paying any attention, going off in one's daydreams, not wanting to be present in the world, where it's whether when it's possible to either sleep or be lost in daydreams, is often a sign that something really terrible has gone on between those who have parenting responsibilities and the behavior of the child, the experienced stream of consciousness of the child, and how the child acts and behaves. So my doctoral dissertation was to identify children who tended to overuse denial and fantasy, because some fantasy play and some daydreaming within limits is very worthwhile. Creativity flows. To use it as a defense when the world is bad or when you're frightened, and to just withdraw in silence into daydreaming and not turn to any human succurrence or any human activity to comfort yourself is not a good thing. Who were these children? So I studied many variables. There are some that stand out. I tried to, I did family studies. I actually went into the homes of various families and I made observations. I gave various instruments. I gave a defense mechanism inventory to kids to try to identify their preferred ways of coping with conflict or unpleasantness. And I gave descriptions of parents of various child rearing strategies. What were their beliefs about what good parents did and how their children were to be raised, and a value statement about what their beliefs about the nature of the world was and about the nature of human conditions. I graded them. I still remember some of the results that were quite shocking to me. First of all, the parents of kids who use denial a lot totally misunderstood and misestimated developmental landmarks. They tended to want to pressure their children. They thought their children should become more mature and become more competent and grow up faster than they did. They expected the child to eat solid foods earlier. They expected the child to stand up earlier. They expected the child to walk earlier. They expected the child to start mastering bowel control earlier. And they not only pressured them to try and master these things, they were really cruel and harsh to them if the child failed to perform. Uh, Among parents who had a child who engaged a lot in denial and fantasy, they were much more likely to use corporal punishment, to slap the child, to paddle the child, to beat the child with some kind of tool, than they were to try and reason with the child or even make the child feel guilty or shame the child. It was corporal punishment that was the go-to for families like this. A second thing that was quite shocking to me, one of the values questions about the nature of life was the following. And parents were to strongly agree, mildly agree, say I'm somewhere in the middle, mildly disagree, or strongly disagree. But the prompt was children are born intrinsically evil and their will has to be broken very early. And the parents of kids who used a lot of denial and fantasy would say strongly disagree to that proposition. I shook my head when I looked at my own results. Uh, so you get a good sense that the kids who have recourse to denial have had very harsh and too pressured upbringing, and have parents who had attitudes that made them very cruel with their own children, and they thought they were doing the Lord's work. That's what was required in order to turn out obedient, well-behaved, and achieving children. A lot of punitiveness, a lot of scolding, a lot of pulling at kids to achieve. Uh, so I am going to go to another handout. I'm now ready to talk about What are the signs in the consulting room that somebody's been very badly hurt during this era? And what is it the therapist can do to try and start repairing the serious or even mild to moderate damage that's taken place during this era? Let me stop this particular handout and go to another one. Here it is. No, it's not here. So let me get rid of this. Oops. Stop screen sharing. Let me try screen sharing again. It's not here. I'll close that. It should be stacked up here somewhere. It's not here. This is the handout I just worked from. Oh, goddamn. There it is. Triumph at last.
What we're seeing is the epigenetic theory.
That's right. That's what I want you to be seeing. Here it is. Okay. Here's stage one, trust versus mistrust. What are the signs of significant wounding during the era? If the wounding has only been mild, you will see a degradation of trust. You'll see cynicism, pessimism, chronic mild dysphoria, aloofness, diminished capacity for intimacy, schizoid traits, sometimes obesity, chemical dependency, because the kids are turning away from human connection to soothe themselves. They've learned you don't get enough soothing from people, so they're soothing themselves with food or with chemical dependency. If they've really been raised terribly, if there's been a lot of trauma, upset, somebody's died, they've been beaten, they've been raped, if it's really bad, you're not unlikely to see breaks of reality, thought disorders, and severe mood disorders. This is when the worst of what we wrongly call psychopathology starts showing up. But what we call psychopathology are really just strange ways of trying to adapt and overcome what's happened. So in the central column is what are the critical repair needs? They need rebonding. They need to experience that human beings and the interactions with human beings can be healing and sustaining. They need to secure sustaining comfort. They need warmth. They need empathy from others. They need what good parents do. They need mirroring, the staying back, how the comforting person understands them, and the ability to be understood and to be validated, I should have added. These are the kinds of things that, interestingly enough, the, the therapy laboratory, the session itself, can be a laboratory in which, in the experience with the therapist, those kinds of critical repair needs start to unfold. So the right hand is possible intervention strategies for the therapist. Intercession, unconditional positive regard. You don't have to give that to anybody else in your practice. You can argue with some of your clients. You can tell them that there's some things they're doing that they better consider not doing. But with the ones who have been so badly wounded, please, they should have had unconditional positive regard, at least for the first 6 months of their life. Everything they did should have been, if not wonderful, at least acceptable and greeted with kindness. And please start reparenting them in the therapy session, giving them that which they didn't get enough of the first time around. Engage in a constant search for empathic connectedness. Try to say back to them over and over again how you understand what their inner experiencing must be. The compassion you have for them, the caring you have for them. You can talk about that. Make empathic connectedness with them. Now, if you're successful, think about who else is in their life space. Can you start helping them make more risk-taking linkage with extra session parenting figure or figures? Are there other people out there who could conceivably start doing in the real world what you're trying to do for them? You might have to do some family sessions and re-educate the members of their family, or if they have a good friend, bring the good friend into the session and tell the good friend how the good friend could be more helpful. Uh, Later on, as you've established a great bond with them, it's time to start moving them out of being the helpless one who endured everything that was terrible, uh, into starting a dialogue with significant others about pain. It's time for them to start having conversations if their parents are still around, the parents who wounded them, about topics such would start with the sentence, "It was very hard being your child. Many things happened that were almost unbearable for me. Let me tell you what some of them was." To start not keeping the secrets and sharing the secrets at its best if it's done with it's actually the people who made the hurts happen. And it takes a lot of courage to do that. And if you're going to do that with your clients, you have to get them ready. The purpose is not necessarily to get an apology or to get an acknowledgement or to get even a change in behavior, any change in behavior and out of the wounding person or persons. It's simply to stop carrying the secret. It's simply to do what there was not the wherewithal or the courage to do it earlier on, to protest about something that was terrible, to protest about something that didn't happen, to make the protest. If they can successfully make the protest, they have succeeded. They may get a fringe benefit. It might make a difference in how the flow goes on between them and the people who hurt them, but it doesn't have to. That's not the purpose of the exercise. The purpose is to stop being the carrier of secrets. And they can start telling everybody else about the secrets too, about how awful their early years were. They can protest to anybody they want to. They can put an op-ed piece in the New York Times that they want to about the horrors of their childhood and about what bad parenting is and what they learned from their life experiences. They can visit it over and over and protest as often as they need to. All right, I will take a pause at that place and go back to something else. I wonder if I can get another handout up. Let's see. Okay, we're moving back. I'm going to start again. I have to, nope, not going to be able to do it. I think I lost it forever. Did I close it up? Huh, damn. All right, I'm going to have to go on to something else and wing it without a handout. But where am I going next? I'll make sure I have the right handout out next time when we meet. I think I'm going back to the family life cycle. I completed Family Life Cycle 2, Securing Intimate Relatedness, Coupling and its Alternatives, and I talked about how it was important for the two people who were trying to form intimate relatedness to make commitments to the new system. I went over what the therapist needs to talk about. First of all, it's the many things that need to be argued about and addressed to form the intimate system, and then a realignment of relationships with extended families and friends to include new significant others who might be arriving in the family that once was. Now, what is stage three? That's where I'm going next. It's families with young children. Again, our culture now in the process of transition. More and more people are deciding not to have children. There are no new young children to invite into the system at all or struggle with. That's a stage that gets skipped over by many people. And is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's probably a good thing for the planet. It's certainly a good thing, I think, for the parents who choose not to do that. This is a dirty secret that I don't think gets talked about. The Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, about 15 years ago, did a very large survey of American families, and they interviewed people with children and people without children. And the people without children were significantly happier on indices of happiness than the people with children were. So maybe we should just surrender and take that for granted and treat the decision to have a child as something aberrant and maybe strange for people to do. Uh, Nevertheless, I think we're evidencing what the anthropologists call cultural lag. The mindsets, the values, the beliefs of most parts of our culture are that is the destination to arrive at in adulthood, not only to get married, to enter the institution of marriage, but of course to have children. Of course. And people who potentially become grandparents are supposed to nag their youth if they're not producing grandchildren. When are you going to give me grandchildren? The purpose of my older years is to have grandchildren. Now fulfill your destiny and do what you're supposed to be doing. And their peers will nag them. What's the matter with you? You're going to, what, are you selfish? You're going to choose not to have children? You're just going to remain kids yourself and just play through life? What's the matter with you? I'm laughing because one of my listeners is making thumbs up signs while I'm talking. Nevertheless, lots of people are going to come to you who either have children or are in the process of having children, and they're going to want your wisdom about a variety of things. Uh, I I don't know. Maybe it's only because I'm getting older. I have come increasingly to advocate for the having of children, not for the ordinary reasons, not because I think it's some kind of moral duty or not because I think it'll bring a great deal of pleasure. No, it's going to bring a lot of work and a lot of frustration to have children. But it's like going to an important, very important course in school. And there are two kinds of learnings. There's there are powerful lessons in selflessness and empathy that are forced on you if you're going to respond to the challenge that children present. Uh, you think you have no more endurance, and then your child gets sick during the middle of the night, and you don't start screaming and slapping the child. Somehow you contain your rage and your fatigue and everything else, and you go and you pick up your child and you try and soothe the child. You may have to give them a cool bath to get the temperature down. You rock them and you sing lullabies to them. You want to murder them all the time, but you don't do it. You somehow find extra resources. I used to talk to my wife, both my present wife and my former wife. I used to talk about, I had the experience that my battery was discharged. I had no juice left. I had no current going in me, but there was a hidden secret battery somewhere else inside of me, and I could finally, if I kept at it, I could access that, and it didn't have a lot of charge. It wouldn't run for a long time, but it would get me over the hump I was confronted with. I actually had that daydream frequently. Uh, Second personal story. Uh, I have no biological children. I think I talked about this on a previous condition uh, lecture. I have two adopted children in my first marriage, and I have two stepchildren, one of whom I subsequently adopted in my second marriage. And I have a wife who loves to devil me in creative ways. So for my 39th birthday, the first birthday I celebrated with her, as we were going to sleep that night, she asked me if I wanted her to have a biological child, that I wanted her to get pregnant so I would have a fifth child and I would have the experience of having at least one biological child. And I was startled. I hadn't even thought about such a possibility. It really startled me. And she explained she wasn't telling me to do that. She didn't need to have any more children. She was quite satisfied juggling the four children that came in and out of our houses and being responsible for them and having the financial burden of raising them. But if this was important to me, she didn't mind being pregnant. She didn't mind childbirth. She would give me my wish and we would have a fifth child. So I said, I don't want to respond too quickly. I'll go to sleep. Let me sleep on this. I'll think about it in the morning too, and I'll tell you. And I said, no. When I woke up, I started thinking, how old are we going to be before the last child is emancipated? God damn it, we have bright children. Some of them are probably going to go to graduate school. We're not, they may even be living at home for part of that time. We're not going to be off the hook for probably until they're in their late 20s. The youngest is now currently two. So, what, 26 years from now? I did the arithmetic and said, I'm going to be getting on towards my older years. And I had a daydream. You and I got cheated. We weren't able to be young and carefree people in love with each other. I think when we get older and the kids are finally liberated, I'd like to travel more. I'd like to just be whimsical and do whatever the hell the two of us wanted to do without having to worry about watching over somebody else. We'd have more money because they would be financially independent finally, and we wouldn't have to worry about that. And no, the answer is no. I think strategically it would be a bad thing. So, goddamn her, every year on my birthday, she would bring it up again as I got older and older. She said, well, I'm not menopausal yet. I still have 3 or 4 more years before my eggs are going to expire. Are you sure you made the right decision? And I would think some more. And I said, no, I haven't changed my mind. But it would get harder and harder to say no. And when she was 40, she said, this is the last time I'm going to ask. I'm pre premenopausal. I can feel it coming. I don't know if I have any good eggs at this point, and it's the last time I'll ask you. And I said, no, I'm not going to do it. And I started crying because I could feel how bitterly I was regretting not doing that. I started having fantasy relationships. I did slowly. I started having fantasy relationships with a little boy who I could bring into the world and with a little girl who I could bring into the world. My biological children, they started to exist in the domain of daydreams. And I would have conversations with them. I would apologize to them. I said, I didn't bring you the gift of life, or who knows what the planet's going to be like. Maybe I spared you from the curse of life. I don't know what it is. But I hope wherever you are, and if you're an experiencing being of any kind, I hope you are welcoming the experiencing you're having. But I'm not going to bring you here to experience what life is like here, and I regret it. And then later on, as I got well into my 40s and into my 50s, I started to daydream about going to a sperm bank, and masturbating and making a donation of sperm. So at least I wouldn't never know where that went, but at least my sperm would get used to produce some real people in the world. I wouldn't have to be fatherless forever. I never did that too. That was only a daydream. Haven't had the courage to do that one either. But I think we may be biologically wired to go forth, be fruitful, and multiply. And even those of us who decide not to do that, because we can take control of our biology with our decision making and with our will, we don't have to be the victims of our biology. Uh, it's not done easily, resisting having children. And I do believe the more people should resist having children. Oh, the second thing that it does for us, besides exercises and selflessness, is it really breaks us open. And I'm going to be talking about that in a little while. Uh, that's the first point on the list of things for therapists to talk about with the clients, adjusting the intimate system to make space for children. It isn't two people who have worked out a whole bunch of rituals about how their life is going to take place, rituals for arguing, rituals for decision making, rituals for aloneness, alone time, and rituals for making love to each other sexually, all the rituals that needed to be discovered, adopted, and worked out between them. It that whole structure is like a bulldozer has gone through it and knocked it all down from probably by the last trimester of the pregnancy and certainly after the baby arrives in their life. Everything has to be renegotiated anew. And in addition, not only is the structure of the joint enterprise broken open, but what the self is and who you are gets broken open. You have a wonderful chance through your child to repair the damage that's happened to you. If you can struggle to use your parenting figures in whatever way you need to for the times they were negative role models and not inflict that disappointment, that stupidity, that hurt, that bad behavior on your child, you're healing yourself. Having gone through it begins to become less and less important. You think about it less. The memories of it are not as painful. You are healing yourself through giving your child what you would have liked but didn't get for yourself. And you're stopping what the family systems theorists talk about, the intergenerational transmission of pain, where the same brutish behavior that existed in one generation gets passed on to the other. To be able to break that is such a sacred opportunity and such a valuable opportunity. I often recommend that people have a child not because they're going to like having a child, but because it gives them that opportunity to take their own serious woundedness and maybe rise above it by being a different kind of parent to their child than there are. Of course, it's a danger. The danger is they'll be entirely the same cruel, withholding assholes that their parents were, and now they'll have to live with the guilt of damaging their children as well as not repairing themselves. So yes, sometimes I urge them to take the risk, but I don't know what the odds are for sure, whether they're going to come out on the good side of that tunnel or the bad side. But that's the first principle of change that has to happen. The whole ritual of who, what makes which decisions, who's going to be responsible for what, how childcare is going to be settled. Oh my God. All the arguments start all over again, and all the hurts about who's going to do what when have to be renegotiated. And it takes months, months after the child has arrived before that gets done successfully. Okay, I think that's a stopping point. There are two other things the therapist has to do if children are arriving or children are a point of contention that I will start with next time. And I will throw this open now. I am ready.
Um, Arthur, I wanted to ask about I don't know, maybe it's a certain type of person, someone who daydreams or has fantasies, but it's looked upon as a kind of a creative process, and you know, the people who use that as a road to becoming visionaries. You know,
Yeah,
your Steven Spielbergs, your Elon
yeah,
Musk, you know,
yeah.
that sort of thing. So what kind of parenting do they need to have along with the concept that they're, you know, kind of like intense daydreamers, and
Uh,
that they, you know, they have that as part of, you know,
I
their process.
one of my twin grandchildren, the boy is like that. He is constantly inventing other universes and he wants to write novels about how they're put together as opposed to this stupid universe. He is a science fiction daydreamer and he loves that. The way you take care of that is that's not the issue. I think it's a natural endowment of children to engage in fantasy play and to enjoy daydreaming. It's an issue if they're not paying attention to what they need to pay attention to in the real world, and they're fucking things up, and they're going to hide there because they don't want to engage with the real world at all.
Mhm.
That's not my son. He's very available in relationships. He has activities he likes doing. He's a fine swimmer. He likes sports, and he does it. He's a very good student in school. He's not retreating into his daydreams to avoid what are the rest of the parts of his life that he should be engaged in.
So it's a choice rather than an escape.
Well, we discover that we're capable of daydreaming, and if there's no rewards for being in the world, we just stay stuck in there. Is that a choice? Yeah, it's probably a choice. Too scary to start engaging. Yes, I believe it's willful.
Mhm. Mhm.
I think psychotic people know they're psychotic, and they're staying. What's his name? Milton Erickson. Milton Erickson tells a day about his first day on the psychiatric ward. Uh, he was in his first year of residency, and he quickly learned that his colleagues, the other residents and the staff, they simply did not seem to enjoy interacting with the people who were warehoused there. They were in their offices all the time. If they never went out into the day room and mingled with the people who were there. If it was time for them to evaluate somebody or talk to somebody, that person was ushered into their office and then went back to be out with the horde. And the nurses were behind the nursing station. They were not out in the day room either. There were a few workers who circulated there, but they were heavy duty dudes who could stop fights or restrain people if they got out of line. They didn't enjoy being there either. So he decided he was going to spend his time out in the ward. If he had to talk to somebody, he'll invite him to come to his office, but otherwise, he'll have conversations with the people there. And the first day, he saw a sullen guy glowering all off alone at the end of the bench. Some other people were playing cards, some were watching television, some were talking to each other, but this guy was off isolating himself. And he decided that this was a real challenge. He was going to make some kind of human connection with that guy. That was the guy who was challenging. So he walked up and sat down on the other end of the bench where the guy was. And the guy immediately started screaming at him, curses and gibberish was flying out of him at the top of his lungs. And he was spitting at the guy. And he was very frightened and upset. He said, "Excuse me, I didn't mean to bother you." And he laughed again so he wouldn't disrupt him so intensely. And he went home and started thinking, what could I do to make a connection with him? Well, he yells gibberish and spits when he's communicating. This must be his form of communication. So I'm going to make up some gibberish. And when he starts his gibberish tomorrow and spitting, I'll start making gibberish louder and yelling at him louder than he's yelling at me. I'll get into a gibberish contest with him. That's his language and that's what he's doing. I'll even spit sometimes. So he came and sat down again, and the guy started, and he started, and the guy was startled and taken aback, and he came back and again, and they were intensely engaged in this back and forth for about 20 minutes, and then the guy got up and walked away. He repeated that for 28 days. And at the end of the 28th day, instead of the guy getting up and walking away, he sat down and said, "Ah, for Christ's sake, Doc, can't we stop this?" That's my testimony. That's my testimony to the uh, meet the client where the client is, and the client is purposefully trying, engaged in a double whammy. Is hungry for good human contact, is trying to communicate, but is doing it in a way that will keep you at bay and prevent you from setting up good human contact. The whole ambivalence about being a member of the human race and the danger of human beings is being enacted in the psychotic behavior.
When I was at the University of Michigan, I was a outreach leader, a leader for a project outreach, and we would take students in a van and we'd go to Northville Hospital. And
Oh,
at
yes.
Northville Hospital, it was just as you described. There were, it was like plexiglass, and then the nurses' stations, and the doctors were not to be seen. And we would go there, and we would bring cookies and candy and
Yeah,
cakes,
yeah,
and we'd be interacting with all the patients and playing basketball. And
yeah.
they loved the students.
Yes, of course. Back then, people were warehoused for a long time. Some of those guys have been in for years. I used
Hmm.
to, some
Hmm.
have been in the hospital. You treated them like human beings,
Hmm.
and you did nothing to hurt them. You tried to provide them experiences that they like.
It was a great scene because I actually had some Michigan football players who came with me, and we were playing basketball with the patients
Yes,
in the gym.
yes. So here's another crazy thing that comes up out of memory. Some research was done on this. If you paint the walls of the day room pink, there's less aggressive behavior and fights if the walls are pink. Environmental psychology. The second one is there's a device that was put into the television set that every 1/16th of a second. So it was as if it was one frame of a picture that was playing. And it was so subliminal, it could not be noticed by anybody. But there was a picture of a mature, motherly looking woman who would simply say, "Mommy and I are one." And if you had that playing constantly, there was much less turmoil, anger, and outbursts among the people on the ward. Strange. We humans
Wow.
are very strange.
Your story about the birthday requests by your wife in terms of like having a biological child is very touching. For someone also who has three children that are all together 12 years apart,
Mhm.
I think one issue that is true, or at least for me, is that it keeps you young.
Yeah,
Yes.
there
So,
are there are benefits.
mhm.
You can have some young friends too,
Yes, that's right. And you can go off and act like an idiot young person. You don't have to have them keep you young. You can act as if you were young.
Yeah. I was thinking about the concept of fit, when you talk about good enough parenting.
Yeah.
I wonder, like oftentimes it's just sometimes the parenting's pretty good, but the fit with the kid is just, or the parents isn't quite right, that
Mhm.
they just land somewhere different. I think a lot of my clients, it's almost like you were talking about like fantasy, and I think all kids are kind of born artists, and oftentimes it's the fit with the family or the institutionalized education they get that kind of turns them into little automatons and kind of
Oh,
kills the
yes.
artist and the poet in them. And I feel like a lot of the people I see, I look at them more as poets and artists than anything else.
Mm. Well, you guys know that I have a client who comes from a Middle Eastern country and had a horrible beginning. She was raped frequently by a cousin of hers. She had a psychotic mother who tried to strangle her a couple times, and she got raped as she got older on the streets of the city she was in by some stranger who just grabbed her, dragged her in an alley, beat her up, and raped her. And she fled the country in great trauma. She had a horrible eating disorder for a period of time, and she cycled between anorexia and bulimia. She worked as a sex worker for a period of time, trying to master the trauma by purposely being the person who was the sexual person and taking control of men by being sexual for them and to them. And eventually, she left the trauma behind her. She came to the United States. She had the courage to get married. And she's spending her career now with a master's degree in psychology, working with damaged children who are, quote, on the spectrum. And most of the other workers who come to the home she go to are from ABA workers. They do conditioned response training of getting the children to be more human. She loves the kids. That's what she does. She brings lots of toy, lots of art materials. She doesn't ask them to do anything. She lets them explore whatever they want. She follows them and talks about what they're doing. There is a boy in her caseload who was 4 years old and hadn't said a word yet, and she did never tried to get him to talk. And I don't remember how he started. Oh, she asked him if he recognized words. She said, "Do you know what this word is?" And he would shake his head, yes. She said, "Can you read?" And at 4, he could read. And she said, "Would you like to tell me what you're reading?" And he said, "No." She said, "What do you like reading?" And he indicated to her that he would print what he likes reading. He wouldn't say it. So he printed SCIENCE. He likes looking and reading science. His father was a geologist, and he was secretly taking books down off his father's bookshelf without anybody teaching him to read, and he was reading science. So she started to bring him all kinds of things, and he started talking because they were discussing what he was reading. He would read aloud to her now, and he knows quantum theory. His imagination is wonderful. He thinks that there's black matter there, the dark matter, there must be white matter somewhere, and he's trying to imagine what the properties of white matter might be. He's just an exceptionally brilliant person. And she asked him why he didn't speak any before, and he said, "Nobody was interested in what I was thinking about. I had nothing to say to anybody."
Sounds about right.
My father was never home. He was always busy. He might have been interested, but I didn't want to bother him. So she has a wonderful relationship with him. He looks forward to her coming. She is the human being with whom he can say anything, do anything, and explore anything. And if she doesn't know the answer to his questions, they figure out some way to look it up together on the internet.
How wonderful for him and for her.
That's right.
Yeah.
This is very healing for her. She feels proactive, like she can do goodness for children. She
Mhm.
can give them what she never had. It is very healing for her. She's trying to find uh, courage, to find the courage to write and or to lecture, because parents are hungry for her to tell them what's wrong with what they've been doing with their children. And she tries to, and she doesn't get the concepts right. They don't understand what it means to let the child lead. It's the ABA training. They have to have an agenda, and they have to teach them the proper way to do the right thing because the kids are not doing the right thing. And her whole philosophy is so different. She wants to try to offer to the world more generally than just the few families she interacts with.
Mm.
She's a wonderful person. And she has many stories of having touched kids' lives. Oh, I gave her the DVD of The Miracle Worker with the woman who worked with Helen Keller. She just bawled her eyes out for about 20 minutes after she saw that film, because that's what she's trying to do, to bring the children up out of their isolation, their withdrawal, their silence, their incapacity,
Mm.
to connect them with life experiences and with people. And now I'm back to family life cycle stage 1, back with the very damaged again.
Mhm.
All right, it is time today. Thank you guys for listening.
Yeah.
Okay.
I will make a note where to start next week. I don't know why I lost all my handouts when I thought I was only closing one of them. More
You're getting better. You're getting better.
Yeah, slowly, I'm learning.
Have a good week.
Okay, here. I'm putting here, here's where I'll start. Yes, I'll have a good week. Thank you. You
All
have
right.
good weeks too. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.